All right, guys, in today's video, we're going to be disassembling our 4L80E transmission. We're going to be using primarily the Transmission Unit Repair Manual. This is the 98 edition. It's the last of the hard copy old body style era ones. And we're also going to have access to the service information at www.acdelcotds.com in case anything has changed. Today we're going to be going through in this video steps 1 through step 27. We'll be doing the rest of it in a separate video just to kind of break it up so it's not hours and hours long. So we're going to start with this, removing the torque converter assembly, and we'll be using, like I said, the term, and thus it's been superseded. So torque converter removal will be the first thing we go after here. We've got our 4L80E on this hydraulic cart. I'm going to just bring it up to the level of the bench first. Make it a little easier to remove this guy. These carts are a very handy deal that you can pick up at Harbor Freight and elsewhere. Now we've got our retainer on here to hold the torque converter fully seated. So we're going to take that off first. And as I go through this, I'm going to point out the special tools that are nice to have and must have, and the ones you can kind of skip on. This is a nice to have tool. If you don't have it, you need to get something equivalent to it, but this is a J21366 from Kent Moore. It's used to make sure that this guy doesn't move when you're pulling it out from under the vehicle or putting it back in. Now, one of the other things we're going to do here, it's not in the service manual. We're going to take a measurement just for later. I'm going to show you how to take a measurement so that you can be sure that this is fully seated. So I'm going to get a straight edge and a micrometer, and I'm going to show you that measurement. All right, guys, for this measurement, just get one of the transmission torque converter to flex plate mounting pads into a position near where the alignment dowel goes in. Get a straight edge across both of the alignment dowel holes. Take your micrometer, measure the distance from the top of the straight edge to the outside flat end of the pad, right? Just like that. In this case, we're getting 38.25 millimeters. Now you can take 2 or 3 of these measurements just to get the rough average, but just take note of that measurement and it'll come in handy later on when you get ready to reinstall the transmission. All right, now that we capture that little measurement, let's go ahead and pull the converter out nice and evenly. She's pretty heavy, guys. We'll sit that there. Now, if you have recently replaced the converter, the next thing in the manual is an end plate check. And there's a bunch of tools on here. You can get away with just a magnetic dial indicator base, and you can fabricate something to do this in the middle, in my opinion. I'm not going to do this step. I'll just hold it here so you can see the instructions. The reason I'm not going to do this step is whenever you rebuild a transmission, you should replace the torque converter with a rebuilt torque converter, and that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So at this point, we're going to move on to the next step. The next step over here is to install the transmission holding fixture. Now, you don't have to have the actual Kent Moore J8763-2 tool, which then requires you to have this J3289-20 tool and this J38655 tool, and all this stuff together can set you back some big bucks. You can get aftermarket fabrication type tools, and I'm going to show you the one I'm going to be using is very similar, and it's designed to go on an engine stand. And so this is what I'm going to be using. This is made in the USA. It's a small company that makes these. And basically what you're going to be doing with any kind of tool like this, whether it's one like this that goes against the engine stand or one that is going to sit on the bench like the Kent Moore one, these castings here are for this tool to sit in. And basically what happens is there's one of these on each side, and this tool is going to rest inside of these and get driven in until it's fully seated, and then there's one on the top. And that's how this tool is going to be held on. And in our case, we're going to mount the tool up on an engine stand, and that's going to give us the flexibility we need to spin and turn the transmission as necessary to do the disassembly and the reassembly. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted and get it on the engine stand, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, guys, I'll show you this hooked up here, but just one other thing while we're over here. The next step is draining the transmission fluid. So we're going to flip the unit up, tail facing the ground, so we can drain out the remaining fluid, make the job go a little bit cleaner and less messy as we continue on. All right, guys, so the setup we have on my engine stand, some stands will have a mounting plate with slots in it, and some will have these arms like this. And mine's an older one with these arms. It's primarily, designed for GM V8 and V6 engine blocks. But this adapter still works for these. You need to get at least 3 of these on here in order for it to be safely secured, which is what we've done here. And they're in the one I got, and I'll put a link in the description to a number of these, but the one I got has 4 holes to work with to handle a lot of variation here. So now that we've got it mounted, what we can do is we can turn her around and start draining the fluid out. All right, so we're going to keep going, get her totally vertical, and let her drain out here for about 10-15 minutes. All right, guys, we've got this part underway and pretty much done. Now we're going to move on to the speed sensor removal. There's either going to be one of these if you got 4-wheel drive, or 2 of these if you've got 2-wheel drive. Now, 4-wheel drive, one of them is on the transfer case. So we'll take these speed sensors off on the case with a 8mm ratchet, and then we're going to move over to this case extension assembly removal, and on that we're going to end up, so they got a couple of tools here, a J23-129 seal remover and a J6125-1B slide hammer. You do not need the slide hammer, in my opinion. You can use any old slide hammer. I do have the 23-129, I'll show you, and I mated it up with just a universal slide hammer using an exhaust manifold studs. That's one way you can do it. There's other ways you can do it too, but we're going to go ahead and get this, and then we're going to go proceed with the steps to remove the extension, right? So it's extension whether you got 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. They give you the diagram, and they talk about the different parts here. This one's going to be a 4-wheel drive. Yours may be similar. Well, all right, guys, so here's our forward sensor, 8mm bolt. Now, she might just work out. If not, you might have to give it a tap with a dead blow hammer. But we're just going to take this 8mm out here on the forward one. This is a 4-wheel drive. There's actually a sensor installed here. Right. Bag these parts for later. On the bottom one, you can see on this 4-wheel drive transmission, there's just a cap here. There's no actual sensor installed. But it's the same exact 8mm type bolt and same type of retaining bracket either way. It's just if you have 2-wheel drive, you'll actually have a sensor installed here rather than this block-off plug. Okay, let's move on, flip her around, and get the rear extension off. Guys, these are 6 15mm bolts holding this on here. There's not a lot of clearance to get a socket in here. So this is the technique that I'm using. You might do something different. Anyway, we're going to pull these 6 off. There's 2 here, there's 2 here, and there's 2 underneath. We'll pull these 6 off so that we can remove this aluminum extension housing. And again, this is a 4-wheel drive unit. Yours, if it's 2-wheel drive, may look different. All right, guys, last bolt. Once this one comes off, housing should come out. And if it doesn't come right off, you can give it a little love tap with a rubber mallet or a good thickly covered dead blow hammer. All right, so be careful you don't get any of this dirt and crud that might be on the outside inside here. But there's this guy, complete with some dead insects that I guess were part of a mud dauber nest or something. All right, so we got that, and then we got one O-ring here. Let's go over to the service manual and see what's next. All right, so we got part 19. Part 21 were the 6 15mm bolts. Part 19 is our extension housing that we have sitting right here. And then for part 15 in this diagram is the O-ring we took off. So we are done with this four-wheel drive setup. They note 675 is an O-ring seal for some models. This model does not have one. This blow up here is a different set that I believe is the two-wheel drive setup. I don't know because I haven't seen the two-wheel drive version before. I've only worked on the four-wheel drives before. This will be the second time I've done this. Not the same vehicle though. So that's there if you need it for reference. The next thing, we got to flip it upside down again and start taking the pan off and getting the parts that are inside the pan. So we're going to remove the pan gasket, magnet, bolts that hold that, filter bushing, and then we'll go ahead and remove the wire harness. The only catch with the wire harness, they tell you use a 1 5/16 inch 12-point socket in order to release the connector retaining clips from the case. They're referring to the round end over here. And then we'll take off the transmission fluid pressure valve and its bolts because they're a different size. Take note that the 5 O-rings should remain attached to the transmission fluid pressure valve position switch when you remove it. And then we'll continue over here and we'll take off this fluid crossover pipe. And again, this is a late model design with the short pipe. If you have an older version of the 4LEDE, this pipe will be longer. And we'll remove this, this detent that is used for the shift position and its bolt retainer. And then we'll take the rest of the bolts off so we can remove the valve body itself. We'll go ahead and remove the manual valve, the spacer plate and gasket, as well as the PWM screening filter. We'll run through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. The check balls, the manual 2-1 band servo assembly, the low and reverse band servo assembly, which is this picture here as well as this picture here. So we're going to run through all of that next and then we'll come back. All right, guys, we're going to zip off these 17 10mm bolts that are holding the pan onto the transmission case. All right, guys, with those 10mm out, you can use a small pry bar to break the seal, get the pan off. You want to take an inspection just to see if you see any major chunks of metal or debris like that. You know, just something worth noting. We don't see anything really obvious here. All right, we'll move on and get the gasket. Now these gaskets, these GM gaskets are reusable, so try to be careful in removing it and you can reuse it. To get the filter off, just kind of wiggle it out. It's actually good if it's on there nice and tight. It's a good sign. Next thing we want to get off is the little bushing that holds the filter right here. Just going to come in here with a small flat-bladed screwdriver and we're going to deform this bushing. I don't see it. I didn't bring my long nose pliers. We'll see if we can get it out with these. But once it's deformed, you can usually just rock it out. Might have to go get the correct pliers though. Let's see. Yeah, we're going to have to get the correct pliers. No, maybe not. There she goes. All right, take that out. That has to be replaced anyway whenever you replace the filter. Okay, next thing up, we're going to take this pressure guy off and the wiring harness off. If I recall the steps correctly. So we're going to come over here on this side first and we're just going to work the clip off carefully. It can be brittle after a long time. All right, get that one off. That one off, just pull up on a little bit there. All right, she's held in with some retainers here, here. Okay, the pressure switch. Just going to give it a little squeeze on both sides and then wiggle it off. And again, guys, want to be kind of careful. Any of this plastic could be brittle enough to break. On this one, it's a lift-up type pin. And then this one is another one of these ones where you have to kind of spread the ears to get it off. Okay, so we've got our harness disconnected from everything. And now we need to get our socket to get this connector off. All right, guys, so here's the connector, the electrical connector. You see these tabs that I'm pushing here that go all the way around it? There's one over here, there's one up on top here. This is what they're wanting you to take a 1 5/16 12-point socket on to push those in. And if we come up on top, as we do this, we can see this guy moving. He's only going to move a little bit. Just want to go slow, because you don't want to break anything. In our case, it looks like we got one tab that's kind of stubborn, so just stay up there, guys, for a sec. Going to take a small flat-bladed screwdriver and kind of coax them along. All right, let's see if he'll go in now. There we go. And the reason we're being so careful is we want to reuse this. We don't want to replace it. A lot of dirt on it as you bring it up, so try to be mindful of all the dirt and not get it inside. The only thing we want to replace is this O-ring. We want to be able to reuse this connector. So by making sure we didn't damage any of these tabs, we can do that. Okay, so we're going to take our harness, set that aside. All right, the bolts that hold the pressure switch are 8mm bolts. And the bolts that hold everything else are 10. So let me get these guys off, and then we'll use our electric ratchet and we'll zip off the 10s. Now we'll switch to our 10. And just go down and get all these going. So I'm just going to continue removing all these 10mm ones just like that, and we'll come back. All right, guys. Let's just bag some of these parts, get them out of our way. Go ahead and take the detent off. That was one of the steps we saw mentioned in there. And then we're going to take off this oil crossover pipe and the retain bracket. And we had to get the the crossover pipe out to get this last 10mm bolt holding the valve body on right there. So let me get these out of the way. And we'll zip that off, and that'll allow us to pull off the valve body. Okay. All right, I think that's everything. Yep. All right, so now we can take the valve body off. What we want to make a quick look at is to see that the check balls are all there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Should have another one. 1, 2. I think we should have another one. I can't remember. I have to go back and check the service manual to be sure. We'll see what's going on with that in just a moment. All right, so we're just going to let some of this fluid run off so that when we tip it, it'll drain out nice. This is our gasket attached to the spacer plate. All right, guys, we found our other check ball. He was kind of submerged in some of the fluid in this cavity. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Some models have 9. This one does not. All right, so now we know our check balls are okay. Let's tilt this guy over this way. Let's go ahead and remove this valve piece here. Now the rest of this is a unit that you can get serviced as a rebuild. This whole piece here with the accumulator and all that will come pre-reconstructed for you. And if you have the original on here, that's what I recommend you do, and I'll put links in the description. I had already replaced this valve body a few years ago for a different problem with a code. One of the solenoids had given out, so I am not going to replace it again. It's only got a couple of years on it. We're just going to clean it up, get new gaskets on it, and reuse it. So let's go ahead and get it out of our way, though, and we'll continue with the disassembly. Just going to set all this kind of stuff in the pan for now. Next thing, of course, was this reverse servo, so we're going to go ahead and get him off. 10mm bolts again. Nice. Always leave one of these a little bit unscrewed all the way because this thing can be under some tension. Now you saw it just pop up there. All right. Well, we do see one problem. And one of the problems that this unit had was delayed engagement of first and reverse. There's two things I can see. Some cracks on this servo cover. I don't know if you guys can make that out. There's a crack here and a crack here. It's not an uncommon problem. This vehicle's got almost 300,000 miles on it. I'm looking for something else, though. There should be an E-clip on the top of this pin. I thought maybe it was stuck inside here. There should be an E-clip holding on here, and I don't see it. Still got quite a bit of fluid in here. Now again, you know, guys, I'll link the other video I did earlier in the year where I already took this guy apart once. Again, to change the valve body out. But yeah, I'm just trying to make a determination on whether that's an actual crack or just some kind of defect in the casting. But fingernail test says that is a crack. And the fact that we don't see our E-clip, I'm pretty sure there's supposed to be an E-clip on there. Yep, there's supposed to be an E-clip that goes around right there and holds that on. So that E-clip busted off somewhere. Who knows where? We'll have to go check our magnet again. We may find it. Going to have to drain some of this fluid off to see if maybe it's stuck in one of these recesses here. All right, well, we got to the step we wanted to get to in the service manual before we pick up with the next step. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bag the parts I've got. I'm going to drain this fluid off. I'm going to hunt around to see if we can find the E-clip that was supposed to be here. I'm pretty sure we already found at least one of our problems. So this transmission had 3 problems. Delayed engagement in reverse, delayed engagement in drive, or first, forward, and both drive and manual first. And then the third thing it had is it kept smoking the fluid. As you can see, the fluid turns brown pretty quickly within just a few months, right? So it needed to be overhauled clutch-wise, I suspect, anyway, but it looks like we've already got our first hard part that needs to be replaced as well. This whole servo piston cover here, as well as a new E-clip. So let me clean up and we'll continue. All right, guys, we're just going to continue on with a few more items up here. We're going to get this filter screen out. Right, so this is another item that was recently replaced, and we did locate our little E-clip. He was actually sitting on the servo cover, embedded in some of the caked up debris, so we missed him the first time we looked. So that's good that we at least know where he was, and so he obviously gave out. Now we need to remove this 2-1 servo assembly. Just kind of let that sit up here and drain out. And then while we're in here, we'll use the pick to get our little balls out. I don't like using a magnet because the service manual advises not to use a magnet, because you can magnetize the balls. I know some people do it, and they've been doing it for years, and they say it doesn't cause any problem, but I am an engineer, so I listen to what my fellow engineers have to say when they write manuals like that. There's got to be a reason for it, right? Just takes a little longer to fish them out. So the only other thing we've got left up here is to remove this parking assembly. Got a couple of bolts here, then we got a pin over here that we need to fish out. So before we do that, after we get these balls, we're going to drain this residual fluid that we still have going on up here, and then we'll pull that, and then we'll be ready to continue back with the next step in the service manual. All right, guys, just to get caught up in the service manual, we ended up not having to pull this seal on our 4-wheel drive unit. You'll have to do that on a 2-wheel drive unit. Unfortunately, I can't show you that, but I will show you this tool coming up in just a bit for a different seal. So we did this piece. We took off our pan gasket. Magnet was attached to the pan. We captured our retaining bolts. We got off our filter and our filter bushing. We took off our wiring harness and the clips that hold it. We took off our transmission fluid pressure manual valve position switch and 8mm bolts that hold that. We pulled off our 10mm bolts, got our lube oil pipe off, the retainer for it. We got off the detent for the shift position, all the 10s, so that we could remove the valve body as a complete unit. We took off the manual valve. We took off the spacer to case gasket. We grabbed our PWM screen just there with the pick before. We grabbed all of our balls, all 8 of them. We pulled out our 2-1 band servo assembly. We pulled our low and reverse band servo assembly. In fact, when we got to this section here, we detected that this piece here, number 64, and the E-clip on top of it are damaged and have to be replaced. The rest of it looks okay. And now we're at this point, the low and reverse band servo pin check. This is a tool you have to have. And that tool looks like this. Right? It's used on several different transmissions. It's going to go in this direction, as we see in the picture. For the 4L80E, you're going to grab 2 of the bolts that were holding the rear servo on, and you're going to use them to attach this tool. Right? And the way this tool is going to work is it's got 2 pieces, and this piece here is going to sit inside. And we're going to be taking a measurement. It's got triangle A, B, and C, and these measurements correspond to reverse pins. And looking at the pin we took out, you can see that this pin has 2 rings on it. And all the pins have different identification castings on them. And this step is to verify that this was the correct pin for this particular unit. Just to compare, after we get in there, we find a problem with the reverse band. If we have to replace it, we'll have to do this again. But let's go ahead and get this set up. I'm going to take these 2 bolts, just following through the directions here. They're telling you to position it over the bore with the hex hub facing the parking pawl linkage for this model transmission. Use 2 of the rear servo cover bolts and tighten them to 18 foot-pounds. You put them in the holes that are marked 4L80E in our case. Here and here. And then when we put the pin in, what we're going to do is we're going to take another torque wrench, and I'm going to use a torsion type for this so that I can keep an eye on the amount that needs to be specified, which is 25 foot-pounds. So we're going to basically crank this nut down 25 foot-pounds. We're going to push this guy down, and we're going to see where he lands. Okay? All right, guys, so for this tool, I've dipped it in some of the old ATF because we need it to move around very easily. So you want to see that you're able to move it up and down with your finger, just like that. And then we're going to take the plate piece, position that in. We'll go ahead and torque that down to the specified 18 foot-pounds with these 2 10s that are reused from the servo cover. 1, 2. Now, we want to make sure this thing is still moving a little bit. Sometimes it can get tight inside this plate. It's such a tight fit. If that happens, you got to redo it because it's got to move freely, just like it says in the service manual. It's got to move freely. See how it just popped up? So we've got to get it to where it's not sticking. You have to fiddle with it, unfortunately, a few times to get it like that. But you want to get it, okay, to where it's happy and going to move freely. Let's try this again. Now, some of this is just because this is a really old tool of mine. And some of it is just the nature of the beast. I'm going to try tighten both down and then torque them. Okay. Now we're going to take our other torque wrench and we're going to go down 25. And what we're going to be doing here with the flashlight, so you can see this, grab my pick. And there's little steps on this tool. 1, 2, 1, 2, and on the other side, 1, 2. And we're going to take our 15 millimeter and we're going to depress it until it goes as far as it goes at 25 foot-pounds. And then we're going to go around the perimeter of this thing and we're going to see which one of these steps lines up the best with this top landing. And the closest one is kind of like the C one, and it's actually a little higher than the C one here. It's definitely nowhere near A and nowhere near B. So we've got the second step of C is a little lower, and then it's above it. So let's go see what the service manual says for that case. All right, so we put those 2 bolts in, 18 foot-pounds. We verified that the centerpiece, which is the 21-370-10 rod, moves freely in the 38-737 plate, and it moves into servo pin bore. We applied 25 foot-pounds of torque to the 15 millimeter hex head, and we watched the lands on the 3 sides to see which one is even with the top edge of the 38-737 plate. And then we can refer to the general specifications chart to see which pin that is. So if we go back to the beginning of the 4L80E section, here's where they have this, right? So what they're saying here, here's the A side, 1 and 2. And if it's not there, then you go to B, 3 and 4. If it's not there, you go to C, 5, 6, and 7. And so what it's saying, because we were slightly above that step on 6, we're at number 7, which is 2. We take a look at ours. So here's our pin that we took out. And if we zoom in, what we can see is our pin is a B3, 2 thin rings. Now, 2 thin rings is actually one of the most common factory pins in normal production. The problem is our measurements said C7, which is 2 thick rings. Now, the reason for that, I think we're going to get everything taken apart. We're going to find that we have an issue with the reverse low band as well, but we'll see when we get inside. But that is how you read these, right? If this was a, say, an A2, this first ring would be thicker, just like it is in the drawing. So what we have is a B3, 2 thin rings, which is 3.356 inches to 3.362 inches. Now, if you didn't have the knowledge of these cast-in marks, what you can do is you can measure this guy in inches from this base to the tip. And we can see we're reading 3.3660. If I squeeze on it, 59. Right. So you like to, let this kind of stuff, you like to kind of move it around a little bit. 3.360 seems to be our happiest reading on here, and that corresponds to the range for the 2 thin rings on B3, 3.356 to 3.362, and we're reading 3.360. Whoops, there we go. 3.360. That's how you measure it. All right, guys, I'm going to show you this one more time because it's so important to understand. So there's the first ridge on the A side, level with this landing. There's the second ridge, level with this landing. If it's past that, you got to look at the B. There's the first step, level with this landing. There's the second step, level with this landing. If it's past that, you got to look at C. There's the first step on C. There's the second step on C. And if it's past that, then you're into the 7th area. And that corresponds, again, to this picture here. There's the first step on A, then you should have a pin with 1 ridge. If it lines up with the second step on A, then you should have a pin with 1 thick ridge and 1 thin ridge. So 1 thin ridge for A1, 1 thin, 1 thick for A2. For B3, that first lip, 2 thins, 2 thin ridges. For B4, nothing. If it gets up here, then you go to C. So C, below that first step, is 5. There's 3 thin ridges. On that step is 6, a thin and a thick, and notice that it's in the opposite orientation of A2. So it's thin, thick, whereas A2 was thick, thin. And then lastly, R, C7, 2 thicks. That's how you read it. All right, guys, moving on from our pin check, we're going to go do the manual shaft removal. We're going to get that by removing this 709 pin out. I'll show you that next. And that'll allow us to take this 712 nut off and then allow us to pull this manual shaft out and then remove the seal, 707. With that off, we'll be able to separate the detent lever from the pawl actuator, the parking pawl actuator. You'll see, and I show you this, it's like a twist and a twist because there's 2 little keys that fit into this guy. And then you'll be able to remove 710 and 711. Then we're going to go ahead and pull the 2. They only show 1 here, but there's actually 2 13-millimeter bolts on this 99 4L80. And that'll allow us to remove the parking pawl bracket and return spring. What we're not going to do is we're not going to take off this 701 bore plug. Now you can, and they tell you how to do it here with a screw extractor. I'm not going to because it's not currently leaking, it's not currently corroded, and there is a chance that doing that procedure can introduce a leak. In my experience, so I tend to not like messing around with these plugs. I'm going to leave it in there. I would take it out if it was corroded, but it's not, as I showed you earlier, so we're going to leave it alone. If you do take it out, that will allow you to then remove the pawl shaft, the pawl retainer, which is just a pin, a clip, and the actual parking pawl. You can take those pieces out. After we get that done, we're going to do a front end play check. And they show you a number of specialized Kent Moore tools from the dealer to do this that cost you big bucks. But I'll show you how you can do this with just some more inexpensive universal type dial indicator tools. And mainly what we're after with this check, so they also use a special tool here to put pressure on the output carrier assembly. We're just going to use a very large screwdriver coupled with a plastic trim tool to not damage the aluminum. But we're looking to put pressure under this output carrier to watch the movement of the turbine shaft 502. And we're using the dial indicator, the J8001-3, to measure that. The J8520 is just to clamp onto the case and reach over enough for the dial indicator to be where it needs to be to complete that measurement. You set that dial indicator to 0. You pull up on that turbine shaft with your hand while lifting up on the carrier with that screwdriver, the J28585 that was in that previous picture, and you're aiming for either 0.102 to 0.559 millimeters, or more commonly 4 thousandths to 22 thousandths of an inch. That's the play range that you want to have. And then you're just going to take note of that measurement for future in the procedure. Remove all those tools, flip the transmission around. We're going to do the rear side play check. Same dial indicator from GM, but a different type of mounting tool. We're going to use the same type that I show you. Again, you get it mounted up, you zero it out, you push this shaft in to take up any slack that it might have. You get all this stuff mounted up, you zero out the dial indicator, and then with your hand, you pull this guy in and out, noting the amount of end play. And the correct play, again, 0.127 to 0.635 millimeters, or 5 to 25 thousandths of an inch. That's it. And then after we're done with this, we're ready to start taking the internals out. And the next thing we would do there is we would go ahead and pull this turbine shaft oil seal ring off, and then we'll pick it up from there. All right, guys, so here's the manual shaft. So this is the piece that would be attached to your lever that your shift cable would actuate between park, reverse, drive, 1 and 2, right? And this guy is the pin that they were referring to over there. And what they're telling you is they do not want you to try and lever up against the aluminum, because you could damage it and mess up the seal between the valve bodies. You can't lever against any of this. So what we're going to try and do is put a block of wood in here. We're going to try and come in from this side and lever this guy off without touching that. I don't know how successful we'll be with this. I haven't removed one of these in a long, long time. Levering it that way works, though. So what we did was we just pushed up against the casting. The idea is to get this guy out. You can see over here on the wood, he's knurled, and that's what holds him in. Okay, so with that removed, what we'll do next is we'll get the appropriate size wrench, and we'll take off what looks like to be a 15 millimeter. So let's see if that's the case. Yes, that's a 15. So we're going to have to find something we can wedge in here to hold this so that we can pull that out. And you got to be careful, right? Because we don't want to wedge anything against here or here, because we don't want to mess up the sealing surface of the gasket or the sealing surface of the valve body. So we're looking for something that we can sit right along the top of where the bushing for the fluid filter goes. So we're going to find something to sit right there, and that'll give us the leverage we need. All right, so we're just going to put a block of wood right in here like that. And that'll give us the leverage we need to get this off. All right. So we get this guy off, and we haven't damaged anything aluminum, which was our objective in this operation. All right, so there's our nut, there's our lever, there's our shaft. So she's got a lot of rust on the outside, which is normal, but I don't feel anything cut in or burred on this side, so that feels okay. Now we just need to get this off. That's got keyway So it only can come off one way. So you twist it that way. And you twist it this way. It comes off, and that'll allow you to then pull this guy out. He kind of fell out, so it's not held in by anything. It's nothing special. All right, guys, we're going to take these two 13s holding this parking pole bracket. Just going to break the torque on them first. Should be able to spin them out by hand. There's going to be a little bit of pressure on this guy because he's got a spring. There's one. All right, and there's our spring right there. So we took that off so we could get a good view of this. We want to see if it's damaged, corroded, cracked, burred, broken, anything like that. And it looks fine to me. So like I was saying earlier, going through the manual, I'm not going to necessarily pull that plug out over here in order to remove this rod and everything, mainly because this is an aluminum casing with a steel plug. If you get anything wrong, and you know, you can probably seal it, and you might have some luck with that, but my big thing is leaks, and I don't see anything wrong with this, and this is not why I'm in here for this overhaul. There's not a seal here. I'll give you the part numbers when we get to the assembly part of this in another video for this particular plug I'm talking about, and again, it's the one right over here by my pinky that you would normally take like a screw extractor and pull out so that you could extract the rod that's holding this parking piece in. But I'm not going to do that because he looks fine. We're just going to leave him in here. When we do the cleaning, he'll be fine. Almost forgot, guys. I will take this spring off this pull, though. He just comes off like that. We'll hold him so he doesn't get lost and fall off. The rest of this is, again, held in by that rod. Back down to the front here, where the shaft came out. We can see him sitting right in there. I don't know if we can get him out with the pick. Might have to get a different tool. But we'll give it a shot with the pick. Just want to make sure you're not touching the aluminum. No, our pick just doesn't have enough oomph, so I'm just going to tap him out from the other side. There we go. Just want to make sure you stay in the seal and don't get anywhere near the bore. Also take note, he's going to go flying. All right, guys, there's our seal. He tried to get away, but he was apprehended. So you can see you want to get your screwdriver right along the inside of that groove. You want to use something with a flat end. A pick will just poke a hole through it. Okay. All right, guys, this is the setup that we're going to use to take this end play measurement. So this is a tool I use for measuring run out on a brake rotor, but it's just fine for this. I basically use the tool for the placement, and then I use a digital dial indicator rather than the analog type that you would normally get with this kind of a tool. And all we're going to be doing is measuring the end play of this shaft, just the way the service manual said. Now, this is one setup you could do that's a cheaper alternative to the fancy Kent Moore setup that you saw in the service manual. Another setup would be a traditional magnetic base and an analog type dial indicator. And you can get a piece of angle iron, mount it to one of the transmission bolts, and you can set that up like that. There's two ways, you know, you could do this kind of thing. I'm just using this because this is what I prefer. And this particular measurement, the first thing we're going to do, like the service manual indicates, right, we're going to want to make sure this is all the way down so we don't get any negative movement. And then we're going to come straight down the transmission into this opening here, and they want you to give a little bit of a lift on the rear assembly here. And we just want to grab the base of this assembly here with the screwdriver. So you don't want to scratch him either. And what you want to do is you want to familiarize yourself. You'll find that there's a lever amount that's like a detent. You can just feel it. It goes up that far and stops. That far and stops. And if we go up and watch the gauge, what we'll see is that amount is about 4 thousandths. Right? Now, if you push down any more, you'll start lifting up the whole transmission. and you'll screw this measurement up. So it's very important that you familiarize yourself with that little detent. You just want to find out how far does it go down where you can actually feel something pressing against something internally. And what you're basically doing is you're just taking the slack out along that selective thrust washer. So it's kind of like holding pretty regularly for me right here in the middle at 3. If you go off to the side a little bit, you get 4. I'm just going to go ahead and take the measurement right in the middle, because that's how the service manual indicates it. And while holding that down and not pressing any more, I'm going to come up here and lift up on the shaft. And what I'm seeing is that I'm getting just over the specification. I'm getting 25 thousandths. And the most I should be getting is 22 thousandths. Now, I'm not surprised about this reading, because this transmission has almost 300,000 miles on it, and it's the first time it's being overhauled. But that gives you an idea for, how to make that particular measurement. The other thing you have to bear in mind too is you can end up having a lot of tolerance issues with this kind of a setup, right? So that's the price you pay for not spending the money on the big fancy tool. And so I'm going to repeat this measurement several times, 3 times actually, to make sure that I'm getting a consistent read between here and down below. So I'm going to go repeat what I just did 3 more times. I'm going to take the best average out of all of that. I'm going to note that down like the service manual says. We're going to flip this around and do the rear. All right, guys, this is our setup for the rear shaft. It's a good clamp point right here on this part of the casting. What I like to do is get the needle down some so you have a non-zero reading, and then zero it out, because this is a very precise measurement on the back. I've already tried this a couple of times, and once again we're going to be out of specification. So what you're going to try and do is take your hand in here and pull out how much you get. And the first few times, right, you may end up having to reset this guy a couple of times. And again, you want to do it 2 or 3 times to make sure that you're getting a good reading, right? And like I said, I'd like to get a little bit of pressure on here, which upsets the tool, so it wants to have to zero it out, because I want to make sure I definitely have no gap here with such a small measurement. Come in here again, pull it out, 0.008, push it back in. So you notice there's a little bit of fluctuation as everything settles. And again, it's just because of the setup we've got. We're saving a few $100s. We're going to have to deal with being off a thousandth or two and just have to compensate for that when we take our readings. And then we're going to go one more time. So 0.008. So the minimum on this was 5 thousandths. And no matter how many times I do it, I'm landing on that 8 thousandths number. And I'm able to get it back down to within a thousandth or 0. So that tells me that even if I'm off, we are actually in specification, because 5 thousandths was the minimum for this particular measurement here, right? So I'm going to do that maybe 3 or 4 more times just to satisfy myself that we have got a good consistent measurement. But that's it. Now we can move on to removing the pump. All right, guys, let's get that seal off of the shaft. Just going to use a dental pick. And then we're going to take a 13 millimeter and we're going to remove these nuts holding the pump on. There's going to be some more fluid loss when we take this out. So let me get our pan positioned and we'll come back and remove it. All right, guys, we're back. We got our pan under here. We're just going to make sure that our fluid is going where we want it to go. Perfect. All right, so I'll show you a close-up of this. Actually, I'll show you a close-up of this now. If we bring the camera over this way, Now the service manual has a special puller for this, but you can get away with, once all the bolts are out, inserting a large screwdriver right here, and you can use this to work the pump loose. Just want to go gentle on it because you don't want to damage the aluminum. So I'm going to go work this around till it feels like it's going to come off, and we'll come back. All right, guys, so the thing that you're trying to do here is get this to let go of the gasket. Just trying to shut the flashlight in here because I know it's kind of shadowy, but there's part of our gasket showing through there, and we needed to break the seal on the gasket on both sides. Here's part of the gasket over here, and this is just giving you a better view of what I was doing. So with the gasket kind of let go now, we can get this to slide out. This whole thing comes out as a unit, and I'm just going to go slow here because I don't know how much oil is going to drip out of it. There she goes. So just going to let some of that run out for a moment. And then we'll set this on the bench. So there's our pump assembly. All right, now we got a few more pieces to get out. Let's go back and see where we're at in the service manual. All right, guys, we did this step where we took the turbine shaft oil seal ring off. Now, they would have wanted us to pull this converter to pump seal off. And I just happened to skip that step. I didn't mean to. And I went straight to this step here, where you normally would have a fancy puller to get the pump off. And I showed how you can get that off with just a screwdriver instead of the fancy puller after you remove these 13mm bolts. And then behind that is going to be a gasket, and there's going to be a selective thrust washer, which was part of that end plate check that we were doing. Now, if we take a look at our pump here, there is the selective washer that they're referring to. So there's different sizes of these. And there's our gasket still stuck on the back of the pump. Now, if I had remembered to take the seal off beforehand, it would have weakened the gasket, and we would have been able to get it off a lot. We wouldn't have as much trouble with the screwdriver. I am going to use, when I do get around to taking that seal off, I am going to use this J23129, but I'm not going to use the 6125 1B slide hammer they have. I'm just going to use a generic Chinese 1-pound slide hammer that came out of one of my blind hole puller kits. This J6125 is just a 1-pound hammer. That's all it is. And I'm going to bolt the two of them up with an exhaust manifold stud. They conveniently have the same thread. I'll put a link in the description for this exhaust stud. It's something you can pick up from Dorman. It's one of the few things they can't screw up, just a piece of steel. And this gives you what you need to pull a number of these seals out. So if I flip the pump over, what they wanted us to do was they wanted us to pull this seal out here. If we can get this tool in there. Right, they wanted us to pull this out. And I don't know if we can get it out on the bench like this, but we'll give it a shot. It's definitely going to tear it up. That's just the T-handle on this slide hammer. It's something that slides in. This seal is in there pretty good. Trying to get it over to a stronger piece of the seal. Nope. So you can see here the seal's rusted in there. Normally it should just be pulling itself out, just like they show you in the service manual down here. We should just be able to hook this J23-129 right on that lip and pull that seal out. But she's stuck in there, so we will have to worry about getting her out when we disassemble the pump. So let's keep going to the next step. So the next step, if we turn around, they want us to remove the overdrive unit assembly just by grabbing that shaft with our hand. Pick up our piece that fell off. Come over here. Pull that out. Next thing they want us to go do is the fourth clutch assembly. They're telling us to inspect the torque of the fourth clutch bolt. The torque should be 23 newton meters or 204 foot-pounds minimum. That strikes me as a typo. 204 strikes me as a typo. I have to go check that. But anyway, what they're referring to is right over here. On top, if we come over and look on top, they're referring to this bolt right here. They want us to make sure it's torqued before we remove it. So we're going to go get a Torx bit to fit that. We're going to check the torque, and then we're going to pull it out so we can take out the next piece. All right, guys, this is a T40, and I'm glad I remembered that that was an incorrect number in the printed manual. If I go online to service information and print this section out, we can see that the correct value is 17 foot-pounds, folks, not 204. Helps to have done this before and recognize differences like that. So now I'm going to put this T40 on just a torsion type of torque wrench, because what they want me to do is they want to see what the torque currently is, and I'm just going to see if it's in that 17 range before it starts to try and turn. And it is. So I'm able to go well past the 17. So at this point, the bolt was properly torqued, which was one of the checks that they wanted us to perform. Now we're going to take it off. This is one of the bolts that was retaining the piece that we want to go after next. So with that out of the way, I believe that was the only thing they wanted us to do here. Let's see. So we corrected our manual. That should be 17. Discard that bolt. You can't reuse those bolts. Your overhaul kit should come with a new one. And then we should be able to remove that assembly. All right, let's see. Okay, yep, she comes right out. And just double checking our oil pan here. All right, next up. After the forward clutch, then there's the direct clutch. And again, there's a special tool being used to get this out. Now remember, all these special tools are because the dealership would have worked on things in the vertical position, and we're going to be working on them in the horizontal position, so we're not fighting gravity. So we don't need these special tools. So we should be able to pull this guy out by hand. And the next step is the 2-1 band removal. So let's make some room on our bench. Okay, got this guy out. Some I want to take a look at later. All right, and then what was the next thing? The band. Band's a little bit further in there yet. Let's see if we can get it. Might need to get a little magnet to help me get that guy out. After that, we're going to have the intermediate clutch assembly. there's a retainer. We take that retainer off, we'll be able to remove the clutch backing plate, part 630, as well as the steels and frictions, parts 631 and 632. And at the bottom, there should be a wave plate, yep, 684. So, might just take that out first to get me better access. Hopefully you guys can see in here okay. Hey, if we zoom in here, guys, now that I got the flashlight in here, I can see. Hopefully you can see now too. I'm going to work this retaining ring up. I'm going to have two of these tools so that I can get under here and get him to come out of the groove like that. And once he comes out of the groove, you can get him out with your hand. With that out of the way, should be able to pull this guy out now. And we took more than we wanted at that point. There's our clutches and steels inside here. Right, so you know they've got wear on them, but they're not shot in terms of welded together or anything like that. Just want to keep all these little tabs lined up until we get to the next phase of the rebuilding process. All right, let's go back to our manual and see where we're at. I think the only thing, we forgot our 2-1 band now that we can access it. Something like this hardly ever gets used unless you manually shift into second. All right, let's see where we're at here. All right, so pull the fourth forward clutch. We pulled the direct clutch. We got the 2-1 band out. We pulled out the intermediate clutch assembly. We pulled out our center support bolt. Actually, no, that's the next bolt. We did the bolt for the forward clutch. Fourth clutch. Now we need to remove this bolt for the center support. So that guy's back here. It's this hollow bolt that you see right there. Let's see if we have to take note of any torque measurement for that. I don't think so. Nope. All right, guys, this bolt here, this hollow bolt, is kind of a unique size fastener. It's a 12.38. So again, the service manual is incorrect saying it's a Torx fastener. It is not. So we're just going to get this guy loosened up with a breaker bar first. And it's a tight fit in here, so you might have to try a couple of different sockets before you find the correct one that has the clearance into the valve body passages here. All right, once that torque feels like it's released, we can switch to a ratchet wrench and make faster progress. So we're going to go ahead and ratchet this guy out, and then we're going to pick it up on the side because the other thing that you have to remove are the cooler lines connectors, cooler line connectors. All right, guys, once we get this hollow bolt, with this bolt kind of out of the recessed area, you can kind of see the 12-point head on it. So it only can be getting off with a 12-point socket. All right, so this is another bolt that gets discarded, this hollow bolt. Now if we come over here on this side, the other two kind of things that are retaining it are these connector fittings for the cooler lines. So they tell you to take this one off. They don't mention taking the other one off, but we're just going to go ahead and pull them both off at the same time. We're going to take these out with an 18 millimeter, or excuse me, a 19 millimeter. So this one's longer. forward, one's shorter. Okay, so now with these out, we can go back and continue with the removal. All right, so we've got our center support bolt out, and again, it's a 3/8 inch 12-point socket, not a torque socket. And we went ahead and removed our rear cooler line fitting. You didn't have to take the front one off, but we're in there anyway, so we just grabbed them both. Now we need to remove the center support retainer ring, and then that'll allow us to remove the center support. Now again, a bunch of fancy tools. This is again designed to help you pull this out from the vertical position. So this tool would clamp onto the shaft there, and then this handle would twist onto it, and you'd be able to lift it out. Since we're horizontal, we're going to not need those, and we're going to end up being able to just pull this guy out without that. Then the next thing they would do is they would place this into another tool that they're not even showing here that this plugs into. And again, this is all part of future disassembly. We don't need that either. If you have it, that's fantastic, but you don't need it. And now the one guy we think we're going to find some additional problems with before we're done here is the low and reverse band removal. So there's a spacer. This is a spacer, not a retaining ring, so keep it separate from the others, and then we'll be able to remove that band, and then we should have our rear output shaft selective thrust washer that we can access at this point. And I believe at that point we're done with the inside. We're going to pop around the outside and do the output shaft, and that's the last thing, guys. So we got just maybe a few minutes left, so let's go ahead, pop in here, get the flat. All right, if we zoom in here, folks, here's our retaining ring up on top here, right there. So I don't know if I can get this with the camera in the way. I'll try. Kind of looking at it from an angle, just not ideal. There we go. All right, so there's that spacer guy out of there. And with that out of the way, we can remove these clutches and steels. And then we've got this special plate here. And again, we don't see any huge damage here. Which is always a good thing, just normal wear and tear. All right, and then we've got one more guy that we need to get out of here. Gonna have to cut off and block your view for a second and poke my head in here. All right, guys, if we zoom in, what I was looking at was we can see this retaining ring here is kind of already popped off partially. Just wanted to make sure that was not going to be problematic for us. Or spacer, rather. Trying to find out the best way to lever this guy out of here. Unfortunately, until I can figure that out, I have to kind of block your view to poke my head in here periodically to see how I want to approach this. All right, guys, we're going to see if we can just get ourselves a little bit of slack here, because there's way too much tension. All right, if we zoom in as far as we can, so for whatever reason why this guy's jumped out here, we had so much tension we couldn't even get this side of the ring to move. And now that we've kind of tapped on it with some wood, we can at least get the ring to move. In order to get it out, I'm going to have to get both my hands in here, so there's not really going to be anything to see. But it's a similar technique to the other ring. We're just going to work it out of a couple of these notches, and then we're just going to have to walk it out one notch at a time. All right, guys, this is what I had to block your view on. To take a really long screwdriver, go up on this end, and take my little pry bar and get him off to get him started like that. Now, hopefully, we can work him off the rest of the way. I'm still going to have to give it a little bit of a pry, but you get the idea. We're going to have to go ahead and work him off each one of these all the way around. All right, guys, what he ended up having to do, I can show you at this point, right? Just going all the way around, giving it a little twist and a little pull to get it out of these groove areas. So we can get it removed. All right, so it doesn't look like there's anything wrong with the spacer. You can see this guy's thicker and got a flat end, and then he's kind of wedge-shaped compared to a retaining ring. Hopefully you guys can see that. All right. Now this guy should move. He's on the heavy side, let me tell you. You just don't want to let him drag, so I'm trying to find a spot where you can get the flashlight to sit. And I can get two hands in here. Lift him up off the case. All right. And there's our thrust washer at the back there. Okay. So on this part of the manual, we're now at the point where we want to get this drum out. I'm going to have to block your view for a moment. I can get this out of here that's holding it, just a retaining ring. Should be all that's holding this band. It's really wedged in there, though. Let's see if we can give him a little persuasion. Just want to be gentle on these kind of problems, though, because if you got something that's not behaving the way you expect, just got to go gentle so it doesn't break. Yeah, she's definitely got some wear, a lot of wear, but she's not wore down to the metal. You can still see the friction material. Not quite sure why she was stuck in there. But that is our last thing that we had inside here, guys. We're done. Let's go to the back and get the snap ring off the rear. All right, guys, time to get the traditional kind of snap ring off. It's a really big one. There. All right. And then we've got this seal back here. And that's another job for our slide hammer. Let's see if he does any better on this seal than he did on the first one. That's how it's supposed to work. All right, that seals out. So if they're not rusted in, that's how it works. And you can see we got a bushing back there. All right, guys, that is it for part 1 of the video. We have completely disassembled this 4L80E transmission internally. And now it's the rebuild phase, and as we do the rebuild phase, we'll take sub-assemblies, like this guy here, and we'll disassemble them further and replace their internals with the parts that we have in our overhaul kit. If you got questions or comments about how to get this far, go ahead and leave them below, and I'll try to help. If you found this video useful, you learned something, or it saved you some money, go ahead and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it, and consider subscribing. I do content like this every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And look forward to showing you part 2 very soon. Thanks for watching, everyone.